Ever since SpongeBob SquarePants premiered in 1999, it's gained a reputation for having plenty of disturbing details. From self-hating restaurant staff to the secret of Squidward's ink, there's no shortage of adult moments hidden in Nickelodeon's most popular kids show. Just what exactly is in that secret Krabby Patty secret formula? SpongeBob SquarePants producer Vincent Waller told Cinema Blend that the show's late creator once confirmed to him that they contain zero meat, as Waller revealed. The one thing I can tell you that Steve Hillenburg has let slip is there is absolutely no meat in the Krabby Patty. There is no animal product in there. One could interpret that to mean that the Krabby Patty is completely plant-based. However, this doesn't align with an official Krabby Patty recipe released by Nickelodeon. According to the recipe, the Krabby Patty contains imitation crab meat. This was probably meant as a joke aimed at theorists who think that Mr. Krabs is killing his own kind and serving them up.
So that's what I taste like.
The design of the Krusty Krab resembling that of a crab trap seemed like further evidence, but Nickelodeon refuted this theory on Instagram, writing, "We can 100% confirm that Krabby Patties are not made from crabs." That said, imitation crab meat is typically made using shredded or pulverized fish, which wouldn't be any less upsetting to see on the menu in Bikini Bottom. Bikini Bottom's ever-suffering driving instructor, Mrs. Puff, has been dealing with SpongeBob's destructive antics since her first appearance in Season 1. But it's not until the Season 2 episode Krusty Love that fans got a glimpse at her surprisingly bleak backstory. In the episode, Mr. Krabs finds himself enamored by the local boating school owner. When he finds out that she's Mrs. Puff, he's disappointed, but SpongeBob fills him in on her relationship status.
Oh no, Mr. Krabs, she's single.
Then what happened to Mr. Puff?
She doesn't like to talk about it.
Not only was Mr. Puff killed by a human, but he also suffered the indignity of being turned into a novelty appliance. While her late husband was lampified long enough ago that she's happy to accept Mr. Krabs' invitation for a date, Mrs. Puff might just have some lingering trauma that comes out whenever she finds herself at the mercy of SpongeBob's subpar driving skills. Case in point, the episode Doing Time, in which Mrs. Puff goes completely off the deep end after getting locked in prison. As tough as it is living on the inside, she prefers it to SpongeBob's antics, which is why she's upset to find that he and Patrick are dead set on busting her out. Darkest of all is when she's thrown into solitary confinement, only to see her yellow tormentor laughing at her from all sides. Working food service can be a soul-crushing ordeal, but not for SpongeBob, who runs to the Krusty Krab every morning ready and eager to serve up smiles. Many restaurant employees are closer to Squidward in temperament, with the mentality of, "I really wish I weren't here right now." The greeter at Bikini Bottom's version of medieval times is one such example. In the episode Dunces and Dragons, SpongeBob and Patrick pay a visit to medieval moments where they plan to watch fish knights jousting while munching on mutton. The greeter welcomes them inside, but he's not sufficiently old-timey in SpongeBob's eyes. Just a brief exchange makes the greeter feel ready to end it all for good.
Someday, but not today.
It's a bit of an overreaction, to say the least, and it feels a bit jarring to see in a kids' show. That said, people in the service industry and beyond felt that it was relatable enough to make it into a meme, which is still used online to this day. SpongeBob has had his fair share of errors and blunders over the course of SpongeBob SquarePants, but it was early on in the show's run that he was confirmed to have a kill count. In the Season 1 episode, Sandy's Rocket, SpongeBob tries to convince Sandy to take him for a ride to the moon on her newly built spaceship. Sandy is understandably against the idea of bringing SpongeBob along, especially considering what happened last time.
The moon! Can I go?
No way, SpongeBob! Especially after your little mishap with my whirly-bird.
A whirly-bird is typically a nickname for a helicopter, which means that at some point prior to the events of Sandy's rocket, SpongeBob's apparent mistake while piloting Sandy's helicopter resulted in a catastrophic event that claimed dozens of lives. Considering how oblivious SpongeBob seems to the implied fact that he is responsible for so many deaths, it adds a dark coloring to the character's constant cluelessness. The cherry on top, Sandy relents and agrees to take SpongeBob to the moon anyway, dooming the people of Bikini Bottom to be bagged and kidnapped by him and Patrick. Nosferatu isn't the only classic horror tale that SpongeBob has referenced before. In the Season 1 episode Squeaky Boots, Mr. Krabs pawns off a cheap pair of rubber boots to SpongeBob after his daughter Pearl rejects them. He uses them to trick SpongeBob into accepting a smaller paycheck, but gets his comeuppance when SpongeBob actually puts them on. They make a horrible squeaking sound that's so annoying that it even makes its way to Krabs' dreams. Naturally, he decides that the boots need to go. In the dead of night, Krabs sneaks into SpongeBob's house and steals the boots while he sleeps, taking them back to the Krusty Krab and hiding them under the floorboards. However, when SpongeBob turns up for work utterly distraught the next day, he starts to feel immense guilt, and he continues to hear the sound of the boots. Krabs finally snaps, revealing that he was responsible for the boots' disappearance before destroying them once and for all by putting them in the deep fryer and eating them.
Don't you hear it? Yes, I did it! I did it! I took the boots! They're here! Under the floorboard!
If any of that sounds familiar, it's because the episode takes a lot of cues from the macabre Edgar Allan Poe story, The Telltale Heart. In the story, the narrator is driven to madness by an old man's disfigured eye, murdering him in the middle of the night and burying his body under the floorboards. Somehow, he can still hear the sound of the dead man's beating heart, which pains him so badly that he confesses his crime. By dipping a tentacle into the science fiction genre, SB129 is one of the darkest episodes in the history of SpongeBob SquarePants. In an attempt to finally get some peace and quiet away from SpongeBob and Patrick, Squidward hides in the Krusty Krab's storage freezer, only to lock himself inside. 2,000 years later, Squidward is unthawed by Spongetron, who shows him an entirely chrome vision of the future. In an attempt to travel back to his original time, Squidward accidentally sends himself all the way back to the prehistoric era, and eventually to a blank void outside of space and time where he can finally be
Alone.
The fact that this particular episode explores the concepts of nihilism and existentialism is dark enough, but there's another detail that makes SB129 one of the spookiest SpongeBob SquarePants episodes to date. For the episode's premise to make sense, Squidward had to stay in the Krusty Krab's freezer for 2,000 years, which means that no one went in and found him for 2 entire millennia. Squidward returning to the present at the end of the episode indicates that throughout the course of SpongeBob SquarePants, his past self still remains frozen in the Krusty Krab's freezer. If he were to be found, the present Squidward would cease to exist. It's a chilling thought that would only occur to the grown-ups in the audience. Not even SpongeBob can play with time travel without potentially causing a paradox. Don't skip school is a pretty simple lesson to teach a child, but the SpongeBob SquarePants episode Hooky conveys that message in a pretty painful way, literally. The Season 1 episode starts as fishermen take to their boats, dangling their hooks into Bikini Bottom from the surface. Mr. Krabs orders SpongeBob to stay away from the field of hooks, but Patrick, convinced that it's a carnival, won't take no for an answer. The two friends play on the hooks by riding them upward before jumping at the last second, but SpongeBob faces the consequences when one of them pierces his signature square pants. At the end of the episode, SpongeBob is left naked and humiliated when the hook rips off his clothes in front of Pearl and her friends. He was never in any real danger, as Squidward turns out to be the one who hooked him, and that makes SpongeBob one of the lucky ones. It's implied that a young fish was hooked by an angler and turned into canned tuna.
Where is everybody?
I don't know. There was one kid here earlier.
The implication that part of Bikini Bottom is turned into a killing field during fishing season each year is a dark one indeed. How do you make an episode of a children's show about swearing if none of the characters can actually swear? The solution that the SpongeBob writers came up with made it so we can never hear a dolphin the same way again. Season 2's Sailor Mouth starts with SpongeBob and Patrick learning a so-called sentence enhancer, written on the dumpster behind the Krusty Krab.
Krabs is,
Do you kiss your mother with that mouth?
When Mr. Krabs finds out, he gives them a verbal dressing down that references the classic 7 words you're not allowed to say on television routine by comedian George Carlin.
There are 13 bad words you should never use.
Don't you mean there are only 7?
Not if you're a sailor.
Despite the episode's insistence that SpongeBob and Patrick shouldn't use bad words, the voice cast felt a little differently, as Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob himself, revealed at a convention in 2016. We were supposed to be recording that with swearing, but not really swearing, which is hard because it said ad-lib almost swearing. And we were like, this is really, really hard. Can we just cuss and have you guys bleep it out? Surprisingly, Nickelodeon okayed the idea, meaning all the dolphin noise censoring occurring in the episode is masking the actors actually cursing in character. It's unlikely that fans will ever get to hear the unedited recording, but it would finally confirm to the world what really means. Some episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants are known for treading into horror territory, like Rock Bottom and Graveyard Shift. The kind of horror on display in SquidBob Tentacle Pants is more subtle but no less terrifying, especially for adults familiar with the movies that inspired it. The story of SpongeBob and Squidward becoming fused together is an extended reference to the iconic 1958 sci-fi horror film The Fly, as well as its remake from 1986 starring Jeff Goldblum. The episode finds Sandy tinkering with a transportation device, testing it out on SpongeBob by sending him to the Krusty Krab. But when Squidward gets in the way, the two end up being combined into a mutated hybrid. Even though SquidBob Tentacle Pants doesn't end the same way as the films that inspired it, its final scene might just be even more disturbing. Sandy manages to separate the two just after SpongeBob helps Squidward earn Bikini Bottom's love by nailing a clarinet recital. Squidward tries to undo it, but instead turns all of the show's main characters into a single gigantic monstrosity.
What seems to be the problem, Mr. Tentacles?
It all started when I was born.
Even though they probably didn't understand the references, this incredibly creepy ending is perhaps the most unsettling body horror moment in a show that's already full of them. SpongeBob SquarePants has introduced a whole lot of characters over the course of its many seasons, including one that some viewers don't know is a character at all. On several occasions, the Easter Island head that Squidward calls home has been shown to be a sentient being. An early example of this is in the Season 2 episode The Secret Box, when Patrick declares that nobody can ever lay eyes upon his box's contents.
Nobody! Not even Squidward's house.
That's not the only time that the Tentacles residence seems to have a mind of its own. Several other episodes, including Growth Spout, There's a Sponge in My Soup, and Bunny Hunt, actually depict it talking, and in some cases, screaming. Here's the thing though, if Squidward's house really is alive, it must have some serious trauma. In over 30 episodes of SpongeBob, Squidward's house has been damaged, destroyed, or abused in some way. It's been demolished by the Flying Dutchman's anchor, swallowed up by the sand, used to plug up a volcano, and even more. SpongeBob's pineapple is also shown to be sentient on several occasions, but only in dream sequences and flashbacks. One Course Meal is a controversial episode of SpongeBob SquarePants for many reasons. It's considered one of the worst episodes according to user ratings on IMDb, mainly because Mr. Krabs' revenge against Plankton goes a bit over the line. After discovering that Plankton has a phobia of whales, Mr. Krabs starts using his daughter Pearl to scare Plankton off, even dressing up as Pearl himself. This takes a mental toll on the Chum Bucket owner, who shifts from his usual maniacal personality into a tiny husk of his former self. Plankton's breakdown gets to the point where he begins laying down on the road in the hopes of being run over by a bus.
Can't you see I'm trying to get run over? In fact, better yet, just step on me as hard as you can. Would you do that for me?
SpongeBob inevitably takes pity on Plankton and convinces him to get revenge on Mr. Krabs by exposing his own fear, mimes. Yet, in the end, SpongeBob still uses whales to chase Plankton away from the Krabby Patty's secret formula. Adult viewers with their own phobias will no doubt view the treatment of Plankton in this episode in a less humorous light. Plankton may have been sad for one episode, but Squidward has been in a lousy mood for the entire run of SpongeBob SquarePants. While it's usually played for laughs when compared to SpongeBob's happy-go-lucky demeanor, there are moments where it's incredibly clear that Squidward is in a dark place. Season 8's Are You Happy Now took things to a new level, exploring Squidward's depression with a lot more uncomfortable realism than the show had featured up to that point. It's based around Squidward's realization that he has no happy memories, which might just be the bleakest plot to a SpongeBob episode yet. SpongeBob's attempts to give Squidward a happy memory only make Squidward realize how miserable his life has been. In one of the episode's darkest moments, Squidward remarks that he can't seem to make himself happy, so he grabs a stool and a rope. It seems like he might just hang himself, but remember, this is a Nickelodeon show.
Maybe this will help.
Squidward has been the subject of psychoanalysis since the earliest seasons of SpongeBob, but rarely has his fragile state been on display so clearly. Even the episode's ending is depressing, as SpongeBob tries to throw a party for Squidward and nobody comes. Squidward's rage-fueled destruction of SpongeBob's decorations turns into his happiest memory. Octopuses famously spray ink when they're threatened, but over 100 episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants aired before Squidward's ability to do so was depicted on screen. Since then, Squidward's ink has been used to set up gross-out gags without upsetting standards and practices. In the episode The Checkup from Season 11, the Krusty Krab employees are made to undergo a routine medical examination. When Nurse Helga asks Squidward for an ink sample in a cup, he asks for some privacy before handing it over.
The ink is a little thick, though.
Hi!
You just need to drink more water. You pass.
Anyone who's had to give a urine sample before could instantly tell what the show is trying to do. A later episode from the same season, Ink Lemonade, paints Squidward's ink in a much different light. The episode revolves around Patrick opening up a lemonade stand, but he's only able to find success after he steals Squidward's ink for his secret ingredient. This time around, it's implied that Patrick and others are drinking Squidward's snot, even though that's less accurate to real life. SpongeBob writer Kaz Propulenis confirmed that they tried to avoid these scatological references as much as they could via Facebook, writing, "Squidward is actually an octopus. An octopus actually inks from its bottom. We took some cartoon liberties because we didn't want it to look like he was pooping. We have the Lord's permission to change nature for a gag." SpongeBob SquarePants can be dark enough on its own, but some fans want it to get even darker. Case in point, a popular creepypasta called Squidward's Suicide, which depicts an extremely dark version of Bikini Bottom that could never make it to air on Nickelodeon. The story was nothing more than fan fiction when it started circulating online, but an actual episode of SpongeBob briefly shows an image of Squidward that looks a lot like the one that the story describes. In the Season 12 episode SpongeBob in Random Land, SpongeBob and Squidward make a Krabby Patty delivery to a yet unexplored location of Bikini Bottom that's extremely dangerous and exists outside the laws of nature. After arriving at their destination, the two co-workers are confronted with a wall of doors, and when Squidward opens one, he and the audience get jump-scared by a version of the octopus with red eyes and black tears. The episode was re-edited in certain territories to remove the scene, and the image was replaced with one of a baby Squidward in subsequent reruns.